Hello. I woke up this morning feeling inspired, though somewhat hesitant, about trying to upload videos to YouTube about me as a consumer of videos, trying to map out who I am, what diagnosis I have. To begin with, I have like an imposter syndrome, and I feel my awareness is something that has actually contributed a lot to my suffering, because I constantly investigate and inquire into my own motives within every single interaction I have with human beings, and I'm really starved to find like a map to help me navigate just a path towards helping myself reduce suffering. In the last few years, I've gone through a lot. Amongst other things, I've gone through abusive relationships, and I started, like many others do, binging on YouTube videos or videos on social media, and I got very well versed in all this glossary, do you say, or jargon of English is not my first language, so forgive me if I pause to think of the right word. So I binged on a lot of videos about narcissism, and I found myself very confused. On the one hand, perhaps I needed to hear the messages that encouraged me to leave, but on the other hand, I found myself to be like a garbage dumpster for theories and some of the things that people who have gone through abusive relationships were saying. I found that it was putting more negative talk inside myself. So I would say, if I had to sum up my experience in life in one word, although my very essence is multiplicity, I would say confusion. And I would say that in this particular era, whereby there is so much information and so much contradictive information, so much abundance of information, with my ADD traits of being extremely overwhelmed and chaotic inside and disorganized, and also not having filters, finding it very hard to filter information, not trusting my own perspective. I find that induces a lot of confusion. So some of the things that have confused me in narcissism videos, for instance, self-styled experts would say well, they have a personality disorder, so you must run away like from fire. Or cluster B is something you should get away from as far as you can. And I was diagnosed with BPD, and I always kind of was suspicious about this diagnosis because it wasn't done by a top professional. It was done by someone who was a student of psychology, and I found him to be very mean-spirited from the get-go, and I feel like this population of people who struggle with a solid sense of identity and self are particularly susceptible for these messages about who they are, what diagnosis, what kind of treatment they should have. And all these videos I felt were trying to, well, not trying to, but they have a formula of what does it mean, what would be your symptoms as someone who is stuck within this sort of relationship, what would be the road to recovery. And obviously these are generalized videos, they're not tailored for your specific case. And I felt I was sort of, well, I wasn't forced, but for the sake of the argument, I was forced to try and box myself into these explanations. So I feel like I would be very susceptible to someone telling me who I am. Like, I must be in this relationship because I lack boundaries and I'm a people pleaser. Whilst that might be true, I don't think that was the reason for which I found myself in these relationships, or the reason for which I stayed. So I think a lot of people who would find themselves in these relationships just because it's very widespread would be people who do struggle with mental health. And if they were diagnosed with, say, cluster B, so they would be hungry for a way out or a solution to help themselves and to reduce suffering, and they're hearing these messages of healing whilst hearing that you should get away from cluster B. Or, for instance, some of these symptoms in some of the videos might be equated to childhood trauma, like being split, for instance, lack of discernment, like I have. And then when I go see videos on ADD, I would go, oh wow, I must be ADD. Maybe it's genetic, maybe it's part of my makeup, my basic structure, and it's not necessarily a result of trauma. And so I carried all this stigma about BPD, and then I hear videos about BPD that it's very similar to narcissism. And I know I'm not regulated emotionally, and severe lack of boundaries and confusion, and like I'm an empty vessel for perspectives that shift inside of me. So some traits which could be related to BPD. And then, for instance, I heard someone who said, but if you don't have this exploitative part, then you're not BPD, and there's a lot of misdiagnosis in BPD. So therefore you must be PTSD, you must be post-traumatic. This can produce your symptoms. And then I would hear like a feminist point of view. You know, first of all, I get confused between how people who voice feminist perspectives, which I very much relate to, can speak about men in general as they would use descriptions which are very, very similar to the traits that are described or prescribed for NPD. So, for instance, I think it's, forgive me for this example, but I think it's the most apparent example. For instance, in sex, men generalizing would be more about their own pleasure, and women would be thinking about themselves from the outside gaze, how they are perceived. And that could be a BPD sort of symptom. But a lot of women experience themselves through the outside gaze, not to mention that BPD diagnosis is often thrown upon women, or historically a lot of women were diagnosed with all sorts of mental health issues when they were traumatized just by circumstances of not having a voice and being marginalized. I have all this noise inside my head, like there are these two camps within the narcissism community, like empaths and narcissists. And empaths, like, there is another camp that sees people who call themselves empaths as having a complex of superiority because they think they are morally superior to other structured human beings. But I feel it's like a hall of mirrors. If they're judging people for their opinions and their perceptions of reality, they're judging them for having an opinion. I just find myself having the imposter syndrome. I already am very suspicious of every word that comes out of my mouth, and analyzing myself to death. I already have this tendency, like, what does it say about me? What sort of diagnosis, what sort of trauma? Am I interpreting it correctly? So I found myself within a coaching session, and the coach had told me that perhaps I should I should question my entire perception of perception. And I'm just like, I can't, I have too many question marks over like every single ingredient of my interaction with human beings. So it doesn't help me to bring more question marks. The inner computer collapses, or like she would say, what do you care what people think about you or say about you? And I'm like, that's like an outer locus of control, like, or maybe like a narcissist who needs validation from the outside. And I'm like, but isn't this why we're here talking about being that there's a genre of abuse whereby your hold on reality or your perception is being undermined because of what someone else on the outside of you is saying. So I simply cannot understand why I'm a human being. This whole thing of people needing to think they are in control of reality and their thoughts and feelings. And in the name of spirituality, kind of going towards someone who's suffering and saying, well, it's not my problem. You're making yourself a victim, or you're not taking responsibility. I could go on and on about my views about capitalism and like the overemphasis on the individual rather than the community, the responsibility of the community towards people who got different cards and perhaps are weakened in society and are struggling. If you say that's yours, that's mine, not mine, it's a choice of yours, there is so much wrong with that. I feel it's dressing up as spirituality whereby it's truly expressing insensitivity because it's self-projection. And so many people preach about choice to people who struggle. And they think if they were in your shoes, they would do a better job. So like superiority. And not understanding that someone else is in front of him who is built differently, who has got different cards in life. Anyway, I have so much more to say, but yeah, I think my experience is marked by just so much confusion and so much starvation to just know how to map myself and therefore navigate myself towards less suffering. And maybe it's a symptom within itself that I'm looking for an outside source to tell me what I've got. I've got a lot to say about that, about diagnosis within itself, the advantages and disadvantages. So maybe I need someone else to tell me that I'm a life form that is deserving of, that has a legitimacy to exist, even though I might have this or that, and that I don't have to have childhood trauma therapy to fix myself or to be deserving or worthy. I could choose to do that. There's a lot of mess in my mind. I won't go into that, why it's a difficulty right now to go into. another treatment. I was over therapy throughout the years, and there are many therapists who damaged me because therapists are human beings and they don't lack bias. And there are a lot of more reasons why. But yeah, I just feel that this population of people who are struggling, whenever people are struggling in someone, there's a lot of times exploitation of people who would offer solutions, and people would grab on to whatever might give them salvation. So I think this particular community is like, who don't have a defined sense of self, would be susceptible to other people telling them what they are and who they are and what sort of trauma or what does it mean about them, what sort of therapy they would need to get better. And it just produces a lot of noise, at least for me, and enhances chaos and being overwhelmed. Now, I didn't do this video, and I'm asking if anybody sees this video, which I'm not sure, please don't try and diagnose me. I'm just giving a little glimpse into my experience of existence and little droplets of my symptoms. And I just thought maybe some people could identify with the confusion all this information evokes. And I don't want to add to that confusion another perspective that goes into this, I don't know the word in English, but just all these twirling like perspectives. I just want a little bit of like quiet and not feel the urgency that I have to do this or that to fix myself, and that I have right for my perspectives and opinions without being like crucified or over-analyzed by is this symptom or another, or this trauma or another. It's like I lost my automatic ability for responses because I don't know whether I have a right for my opinion. That's another whole new subject that I get very confused about, like discernment, who's toxic and who's not, and therefore I'm more susceptible to dangerously toxic, whatever it means, because I find within that a lot of people, there's like a hypocrisy, use components or from the toolbox of the so-called traits of narcissism. That's a whole new subject. If anybody would hear me, I would go into that another day. Anyway, I just thought whether there are any like-minded people who find the information really overwhelming and confusing. Who don't know how to map themselves, how to read themselves, and feel like garbage dumpsters for theories. So I'll see whether anybody sees this video and relates, And then maybe there could be, I can voice like a different approach of the people who are over open for interpreting themselves and not knowing how to filter out information. So it could be a very confusing experience. So that's it for today. I overbabbled. It's already too long. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.